Imagine a world where one wrong decision, one misunderstood radio message, or one nervous soldier on a nuclear missile button could have ended humanity in minutes. This was not a movie. This was not fiction. This was the Cold War, a silent, global standoff that lasted nearly 50 years, shaping the modern world more than any conflict in history. Today, we are diving deep into the untold stories, dangerous confrontations, secret operations, spies, propaganda, and political chess moves that defined the Cold War. So stay with me till the end because the story gets more intense the deeper we go. Chapter 1. The World After World War II, 1945. In 1945, World War II ended with destruction on a scale the world had never seen. Cities were rubble. Economies were broken. Millions were displaced. But two nations emerged extremely powerful, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both had fought against Nazi Germany, but their alliance was temporary, more like an alliance of convenience. Underneath the smiles at victory celebrations, both sides already feared each other. Why? Because they had completely different visions for the future. The United States, democracy, capitalism. The Soviet Union, communism, one-party rule, government-controlled economy. These two systems couldn't coexist peacefully, and soon, the flames of competition turned into a global rivalry. Chapter 2. The Iron Curtain and Beginning of Tension. Winston Churchill famously said in 1946, "An iron curtain has descended across the continent." This iron curtain wasn't a real wall, not yet. It was a metaphor for the political divide between Western Europe, supported by the US, Eastern Europe. Controlled by the Soviet Union, the Soviets installed communist governments in Poland, Hungary, Romania, East Germany, and more. The US saw this as expansion a threat, so the US responded with a new policy called containment, a strategy to stop communism from spreading anywhere in the world. This was the first spark of the Cold War. Chapter 3. The Marshall Plan. Berlin. Blockade. 1947 to 1949, Europe was starving and economically destroyed after World War II. The US launched the Marshall Plan, sending billions of dollars to rebuild Western Europe and prevent communism from taking root. The Soviets hated this. They saw it as American influence invading Europe. And then came the first major showdown. Berlin. Berlin was divided into East Soviet and West US, UK, France. But the entire city was inside Soviet-controlled East Germany. In 1948, Stalin tried to push the West out by cutting all roads and railways. No food, no fuel, nothing. This was the Berlin Blockade. But the US and allies did not back down. They launched the Berlin Airlift, flying over 275,000 flights, delivering food and supplies for almost a year. In 1949, the Soviets gave up. It was a huge American victory and a blow to Soviet prestige. Chapter 4. Formation of NATO and Soviet nuclear bomb. After Berlin, the West realized they needed a permanent alliance. In 1949, NATO was formed, a military pact, where an attack on one member meant an attack on all. The Soviets responded by creating their own alliance later, the Warsaw Pact. But the real shock came that same year. The Soviets successfully tested their first nuclear bomb. The US no longer held a monopoly on nuclear weapons. A new era began. The arms race. Chapter 5. Terror, scare, and spies everywhere. In the early 1950s, fear spread across the US. The government warned that Soviet spies were everywhere, in schools, Hollywood, the military, even in the government itself. This period is known as the Red Scare. CIA and FBI agents hunted for communists. Careers were destroyed. Some real spies existed, others were innocent victims of paranoia. On the Soviet side, the KGB grew stronger, conducting secret operations, influencing foreign governments, and spying worldwide. Espionage became the silent battlefield of the Cold War. Chapter 6. The Korean War, 1950-1953. The Cold War turned hot for the first time in Asia. After Japan's defeat, Korea was split into North Korea Communist, backed by USSR, and China South Korea, supported by the US in 1950. North Korea invaded South Korea. The US and United Nations responded. China sent troops. It became a brutal, bloody conflict with millions dead. By 1953, the war ended exactly where it started, with Korea still divided, but the message was clear. The Cold War was no longer just political, it was military. Chapter 7, The Space Race, 1957 to 1969 and 1957. The Soviets launched Sputnik, the first satellite in human history. The world was shocked. The US panicked. If the Soviets could launch a satellite, they could launch nuclear missiles. The space race became a symbol of who was superior, capitalism or communism. The Soviets achieved early victories. First satellite, Sputnik, first man in space. Yuri Gagarin, first woman in space, first spacewalk. But America made the ultimate comeback. In 1969, the US landed the first humans on the moon. This was not just science, it was a massive political victory for the US. Chapter 8, The Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. The closest we came to World War III. This is the most dangerous moment of the entire Cold War. In 1962, American spy planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. The US demanded removal. The Soviets refused. For 13 days, the world held its breath. US warships surrounded Cuba. Nuclear missiles were on alert. Both sides prepared for war. One misunderstanding could have ended the world. Finally, a secret deal was made. Soviets removed missiles from Cuba. US secretly agreed to remove missiles from Turkey. The US promised not to invade Cuba. The crisis ended, but the fear of nuclear war never disappeared. Chapter 9, Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, another major battleground of the Cold War. North Vietnam was communist. South Vietnam was backed by the US. The US intervened heavily, sending millions of troops, but unlike Korea, this war became one of America's biggest failures. The Viet Cong used guerrilla tactics. The jungle environment was brutal. Public opinion in the US turned against the war. In 1975, the US withdrew and South Vietnam fell to the north. The Soviets saw this as a major victory for communism. Chapter 10, The Era of Détente, 1970s. After decades of tension, both sides were exhausted. Nuclear weapons were becoming too powerful. Economies were strained. People feared constant war. So the US and USSR agreed to slow down the arms race. They signed treaties like SALT-I, Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, improved diplomacy, trade agreements. This was the period of détente, meaning relaxing tensions. But the peace didn't last. Chapter 11, Soviet Invasion of Afghanistan, 1979. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan to support a communist government. The US saw this as another expansion of Soviet influence. So America armed Afghan fighters known as the Mujahideen, including young radicals like Osama bin Laden. The war dragged on for a decade, costing the Soviets billions and thousands of lives. Many historians call Afghanistan the USSR's Vietnam. It weakened the Soviet Union so much that it helped accelerate its collapse. Chapter 12, Rise of Ronald Reagan and Renewed Tensions, 1980s. In the 1980s, US President Ronald Reagan took a tougher approach. He called the Soviet Union the evil empire. He increased military spending massively, developing new weapons and pushing the USSR into an economic battle it could not win. He also announced the Star Wars program, a missile defense system in space. It wasn't fully real, but it scared the Soviets. The USSR simply could not compete financially. Chapter 13, Mikhail Gorbachev and the Beginning of the End. In 1985, a new Soviet leader came to power, Mikhail Gorbachev. He realized the Soviet system was collapsing from the inside. Food shortages, economic problems, corruption, falling technology, weak industry. So he introduced the major reforms. Perestroika, restructuring the economy, glasnost. These reforms unintentionally weakened Soviet control. People demanded more freedom. Communist governments in Eastern Europe began collapsing. In 1989, the world witnessed a historic moment. The Berlin Wall fell. Crowds cheered. People cried. Families reunited after decades. It symbolized the collapse of Soviet influence in Europe. Chapter 14, The Collapse of the Soviet Union, 1991. By 1991, The USSR was broken from the inside, economy failing, republics wanting independence, political instability everywhere. In December 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved into 15 independent countries. The Cold War ended not with a battle, not with a nuclear war, but with the collapse of one superpower. The legacy of the Cold War shaped the modern world, created NATO, led to nuclear weapons treaties, defined US-Russia relations, inspired technological advancements, changed borders, sparked major wars like Korea and Vietnam, influenced culture, movies, science, and global politics even today. Many world tensions trace back to the Cold War era. It wasn't just a conflict. It was a global psychological battle that lasted nearly half a century, and it reminds us of one important truth. Sometimes the most dangerous wars are the ones that are never fought openly.